You're here to delve into the intriguing world of achieving security through digital resilience. Today, we have two exceptional experts with us, Paul Kay, a seasoned senior regional principal engineer at Trace3, and Apollo Hernandez, a security advisor at Splunk with a remarkable journey from the battlefield to the cybersecurity front lines. With their wealth of experience, we're about to explore how cyber resiliency can help us anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to the ever-evolving challenges of cyber resources. Please welcome Paul and Apollo.
We know you guys want to be done, so we'll be quick, don't worry.
Yeah, thank you for coming out.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Apollo Hernandez. I'm with Splunk.
And I'm Paul Kay. I'm with Trace3.
So before we jump into, let me grab this guy and get it going. Before we jump into it, just to introduce ourselves, again, Apollo Hernandez with Splunk. I'm a security advisor. Basically, we are a non-sales resource that customers or people that are looking at Splunk can use to kind of start with security. Or just Splunk in general, because Splunk, we all know, does a lot of things very well. A lot of customers have it. They don't use it to its full potential value, and I kind of help customers on that path. A little bit about myself, as you can probably see from the pictures. I'm a former military dude. I was lucky enough to have a special operations capable background. So before I kind of jump in, I'm going to steal a little bit. I personally think one of the biggest things that we have in cybersecurity, one of the biggest problems, period, is lack of talent. There are more jobs than there are people, and I think a good way to fill that is by looking at either people that are veterans or people that are in the process of getting out of the military. Whether you're in a commando-type special operations unit or a cook, it doesn't matter. Everybody understands the basic principles of security, and that directly translates or correlates into cybersecurity. So it's a really good field or a really good group of people to look at when you're recruiting. And again, it doesn't matter what branch, it doesn't matter what the job was, it doesn't matter if they were doing cybersecurity in the military. Having that basic understanding of security is super helpful, and that's a good place to look when you're trying to, fill those seats. But yeah, so back into this. As also, I've done a bunch of school. Went to UT for undergrad, and also went back to the business school. And then it's a little confusing, so yeah, hook 'em horns. I also went to Texas A&M. I went to the school of law, but don't worry, I am not an attorney. I did a program specifically focused on cybersecurity law, policy. It's just really helpful. And then I'll let Paul introduce himself real quick.
So my background isn't as impressive with the military stuff, but definitely echo what he said, where a lot of the strongest people that I've worked with in my career have been ex-military, and it definitely translates in terms of skill. Kind of put my background in categories up here just because I've worked in a lot of verticals, completely all in IT and with a heavy focus on security. But I am the regional senior principal consultant for Trace3. My background there is mostly just kind of the verticals I've worked with in the security focus, and went to Virginia Commonwealth University, and all the photos there are kind of the last year of traveling with the wife. So that's kind of what I like to do in my free time.
Cool. So jumping into kind of where we're getting these numbers from. So Splunk, we work with a group called the Enterprise Strategy Group. We basically hired them to do a survey of security leaders that spend most of their time either working in security or doing some kind of policy action for security. And they interviewed, over 1,200 people, or approximately 1,200 people, and they, give us some feedback. And within that, this is all stuff that you guys all know about. We know that, COVID has changed the game for a lot of people, and it still has. Remote work, it's a part of life now for a lot of companies, and it's probably not going to be switching back anytime soon.
Yep.
It's slowly but surely, coming back, but it's probably never going to be the way that it was before. Also, the digital transformation, that was a big thing pre-COVID. Oh, let's move to the cloud. Well, now COVID kind of forced that. There were a lot of companies that were hesitant to do that. Oil and gas, financial, like healthcare. Nobody wanted to do that. They didn't trust the security of the cloud. But now, I mean, we see here that digital transformation, 83% kind of complete. Companies are going to the cloud, and that's just changed the name of the game. The landscape has changed because the cloud opens up a lot of different things. In security, people got budget. When they got budget, they were like, hey, let's buy tools. Buying tools, one of my biggest things is sometimes just buying stuff isn't the answer to everything. It can help, but it also can create problems. So with the landscape changing, threats have changed, we as security people need to respond and react appropriately.
So what this kind of creates in the environment is kind of these categories you see here: lack of visibility, blind spots across data silos, multi-cloud environments, just the landscape in general changing, especially with remote work and cloud kind of becoming a high priority for a lot of organizations. We've got an expanding attack surface, sophisticated threats, and hybrid work is a big portion of that, especially the hybrid work. Tooling complexity, to Apollo's point, where you don't just kind of buy the tools, you really have to tune them and get knowledge and expertise in your environment to really take advantage of them. And then going back to Apollo's previous point about kind of lack of expertise as well and resource issues, kind of keeping those resources that are bright and have potential but not necessarily experts, kind of a big thing there where you want to nurture that growth across the organization, especially with these changes.
We all know there's a huge talent war going on. Everybody in security is probably getting hit up on LinkedIn all the time. That's just the nature of the game. And the game has also been changing. So people that are in security nowadays are doing things a little bit differently. They have to. The purview of security is just expanded. So new things have popped up that responsibility, people kind of point the blame at security, like controlling, APIs or DevSecOps. That's like kind of a new thing that has popped up in the past couple of years. All of this is falling under security, and it's relatively new. Teams have just had to change. CISOs, security managers, SOC analysts, they're having to do more with less. And it's just the way things are, and it's kind of a cat and mouse game. There's always going to be changes in security. Bad guys are going to be doing different things, and then security-focused people are going to respond in different ways, and that's going to require different tools, different platforms to use. You need to be able to have visibility across the board, and that's kind of driven, cyber resilience or business resilience. I am going to read this slide because of the fact that every different company has its own definition of cyber resilience or business resilience or whatever kind of resilience they want. But this is from NIST. At the end of the day, we're a U.S. country. NIST is kind of the golden standard that I think most companies should follow. They're the ones that kind of enforce the rules of what, how we'll be penalized. But this is what NIST's definition of cyber resilience is. So it's the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions, stresses, attacks, and compromises on systems that use or are enabled by cyber resources. That's everything. Everything in some form or fashion is connected to the internet or some kind of cyber tool, some computer that's going to require cyber resources. And this is everything. Like, even if something's like a nuclear energy company that's air-gapped and they want to be able to turn everything off, it's typically connecting to some kind of technology that you need to have visibility into. It's going to create data. It's going to create logs. That's just a good standard practice to have that insight.
Yeah, and it also plugs into kind of more integration from the cyber side of things into the business. If you go to the next slide, we can kind of exemplify this where, your cyber program is the operational resilience to the business ultimately, but more and more cyber is becoming everybody's responsibility. So it's plugging into the people, the financial, the ecosystem, everything across the board, just because cyber is now not just a little silo of a SOC. It's, plugged into the business, especially with like DevSecOps becoming more and more used across the board. You have your developers now following security protocols instead of security kind of coming in and telling them, no, you can't use that build, go rewrite it and solve these problems. So it's becoming kind of more and more plugged into the actual business resilience side of things.
I'm sure everybody here has heard resilience this. I've seen a couple t-shirts that have resilience, and not just the Splunk t-shirts, other vendors that have resilience. At the end of the day, we know someone went to the Wharton Business School or Harvard Business School, one of those top B schools, said it at a conference, and then it just caught on. That has correlated into that cyber resilience aspect, but it is good to talk about it, to quantify it, to visually see it, and come up with a game plan. That's the good outcome. But at the end of the day, this is stuff that we've all been doing for a long time. It's just putting it on paper. We have seen, and it's not just us. Gartner has kind of said that the best way to become, have a cyber resilient company is to be able to detect, investigate, and respond to threats. It's a Gartner coined term. They came up with this thing called TDIR, Threat Detection, Investigation, and Response. And that's a pretty good standard to follow, to become more resilient, to be able to withstand things, to be able to detect things so you can see what's going on in your environment and let your operators that are in the trenches be able to investigate something so they'll know what's going on, and then they can respond appropriately.
And it's important to kind of use this infographic when you're looking at SIM products and so forth, where you can have your apples and apples comparison with a lot of products as to do they check this box, so forth. But the reality is they should be doing these kind of 5 core functions for you and enable your SOC to better respond to incidents ultimately.
And we are trying to keep this vendor agnostic, but Splunk does offer a platform that helps you answer those TDIR, functions that Gartner is pushing. Initially, when they came up with TDIR, when they announced a couple years ago, oh, this is going to replace SIM, well, that made our ears perk up and got us a little worried. But when we looked at what it really is, it's a combination of SIM, SOAR, and some threat intelligence kind of combined into one spot. It just helps customers, again, be more resilient, and we have tools, mature tools, that can help with that. We've all seen, a modern SOC. This is what we believe. Now we're going to get into the meat of things. We're going to get into what we believe are good sources, log sources, good things that you need to have visibility on to be able to respond to threats.
So if we start looking at kind of what we're trying to accomplish with threat hunting, this is a typical kind of, spam email or phishing attack, basically, where, you have an attached PDF and a bunch of bad stuff happens if you click it, basically. But the approach is to deny and disrupt in whatever way you can, ultimately, to this attack. Right, so there's a few ways that you can do this, and kind of the X's in the diagram here, where you can deny and disrupt the attacker in their process to kind of throughout their kill chain effectively.
And this is just an example of what happens, or what let's say a tier 3 threat hunter is having to do to be able to respond to things. Now, to be able to respond to things, you need to be able to see it, and to be able to see that, you need logs, you need information. So I definitely recommend you take a screenshot of this or snap a little quick pic. These are log sources that we've identified as really important for that process. And again, I don't care if you're using Splunk, I don't care if you're using QRadar, Logarithm, another tool, competitor. These are all helpful logs that you need for basic security to help your operators that are in the trenches get visibility into threats, to be able to detect those threats. It's just super helpful to have.
And one of the big points here is you're going to have your detections in the SOC, and they're going to be looking at, your kind of your endpoint data, your telemetry, your command line logs, whatever's going on the endpoint. But you also kind of need to be able to tie whatever is driving your detections back to the identity side. And we see this kind of rising up with risk-based alerting, as well as kind of rolling those into identities ultimately. So building out your SOC or your SIM to consume the data, to to drive the detections is one part, but also kind of ingesting the data to support, okay, I have this event and this identity has been compromised. Where else have they been in the environment is a huge portion to that.
And again, this is just listing those sources in a different kind of way, so you can kind of not just have the log files, you get a bunch of information that you need. And again, what I did in the military was not, I didn't do cybersecurity in the military. I did regular physical security, I guess. But at the end of the day, all those elite units that are out there, SEALs, Recon Marines, Raiders, Special Forces, all that stuff, it's not that they're better than your typical infantry unit. It's just they're more refined and honed on brilliance in the basics. That's one thing they push a lot. Brilliance in the basics is what you need to be able to, execute well on missions. This is what you need for brilliance in the basics for your threat hunting team.
And it's color coded a little bit, where red is kind of more important and orange is behind that, and then gray also as well, kind of your third tier. But that's not to say that the grays are not important. Ultimately, they do support kind of your investigation and understanding where pivot points are and where movement has occurred, basically. So you want to ingest the reds, obviously. You want to ingest the yellows, but you definitely want to ingest the grays as well. It's not order of importance, it's order of kind of building your detections, ultimately.
And one big thing with having all these logs, all these alerts, all this stuff that you need for security, to break it down, you need to map it, or it's helpful to map it to popular frameworks that already exist. We've all heard of the Lockheed cyber kill chain. This is just a really helpful framework that people can use to help respond to things and have an understanding of what the bad guys are doing.
And kind of tying this back to our previous slide around the data sources to ingest, obviously your IOCs and your threat intel is going to cover pretty much the entirety of this kill chain, but kind of looking at the top section, ingesting all the data that you need to support your threat hunting effectively will cover, the more data you can ingest, ultimately the better it is, regardless of whether or not it drives an actual detection. And getting into these, so the one on the left here is the pyramid of pain model. This is one of my favorite kind of infographics or diagrams in the cybersecurity space, and some people will misinterpret this a little bit, where they think that you need to have this giant base of, hey, I'm looking for all these hashes and IOCs in my environment, and I'm also looking for a wide amount of IP addresses and so forth. But the reality of the pyramid of pain is, you'll see on the left or on the right, where it's tough, challenging, annoying, simple, easy, and trivial. That's both affecting the attacker as well as the defender. So as a defender, it's really easy for me to say, okay, I know this hash is bad. Let's watch for that hash. But it's also really, really easy for an attacker just to add a comment to that file. It's still doing the same thing, but the hash is completely changed. So the idea here is, as you move up, and this is kind of moving up in the space of, I've got an APT, I've got a specific threat actor that's coming, and doing bad stuff in the environment effectively. You don't want to build 8,000 detections for hashes that are associated with that, and then, say that's good enough and we have a lot of detections for this type of attack. The reality is that, as you move up IP addresses, domain names, it becomes increasingly more difficult for the attacker to basically pivot and do the same type of attack that they've been doing the further you go up that pyramid of pain. So if you have more coverage at the top of what you're looking for, specific to a threat actor, you don't need to be loading your SIM with 8,000 different hashes that you're always looking for, because the reality is that's really easy to change around as the attacker. So if you have detections higher up on the pyramid, that's a more effective way of detecting ultimately.
And using those different sources that are out there, those third-party sources, whether they're from an MSSP type vendor or an MDR, it doesn't matter, a threat intel feed, all that stuff exists. There's whether it's a paid threat intelligence feed that's really good, like Recorded Future, or an open source net or some kind of ISAC that's providing threat intelligence. There's a lot of stuff out there to help you guys in the trenches respond to things appropriately. And there are other frameworks. There are tons of frameworks out there that you guys can use, that people use to respond to threats, and it just helps with stuff. Helps with being able to identify those things. And all of that context, all of that stuff that's out there, threat intelligence, those alerts, those logs. They basically create a lot of noise for people that are in the trenches responding to things. So at Splunk, we have what's called risk-based alerting. The idea of risk-based alerting, and this isn't a tool that you have to buy. If you have Splunk, enterprise security specifically, you have risk-based alerting. You just need to set it up, activate it. And what it does is it's taking all those things that are happening, that are going to be happening in your environment, and instead of getting a single alert for that one thing, like a potential spear phishing observed, or a suspicious PowerShell, or having someone disabling something that seems a little odd, but it might not be malicious. It's giving everything kind of a risk score, and as that risk score climbs up, that's when a notable can be. Once it hits a certain point, that incident risk score can be created to create a score. A lot of companies will call this UBA, user-based analytics, or UEBA, user entity-based analytics. It's more or less what it's doing, and this is something that Splunk provides for free. It's creating one alert, it's giving one high-fidelity alert that if you want to, you can drill down into. As you open up that alert, you can see all of those things listed there. Click on the little alert icon, and it'll just kind of go down. So if you want to do a deep drill down into what's happened, you can do that with RBA.
And going back to that identity portion of the data sources on the earlier slides, that's where it becomes super important to not just ingest your threat detection data sources, but also who's who and what's what, because ultimately risk-based alerting kind of rolls up to identity, be it user, be it server, IP address, host name, whatever have you.
So just kind of jumping into another source that I think every security team should kind of focus on, fraud. Fraud happens everywhere. It's not just for, financial institutions that need to worry about fraud, or retail institutions that need to worry about fraud. Everyone in some form or fashion has a chance to possibly be affected by fraud. And it's just changed over time. It's getting easier and easier to commit fraud, especially with things like social media and all that. We do have some big examples that are pretty common in the industry, specifically account takeover. That's something that any company could be, affected by. We all get those phishing emails, and someone clicks on something that they want to see cute puppies or something like that, and then they enter in, their credentials to a spoofed website that now someone's a bad guy, typically has your information and can log into things. Anyone can be affected by fraud. Very prevalent.
Yeah, and one of the things to call out here, especially with the account takeover fraud side of things, is we all live online effectively nowadays. We all have accounts that are registered to an email address, and a lot of that is tied to basically your identity, your email address. So account takeovers becoming higher and higher risk and pivot point to be able to, if I can compromise your email, I can effectively reset the password, depending on MFA, reset the password for all the accounts tied to that, and now I own your identity on LinkedIn, I own your identity on Facebook. So protecting that core kind of common point of who you are is becoming more and more important.
Online purchases. This is another one that everyone buys stuff online nowadays. I do it all the time. My wife does it all the time. Like, it's just the world we live in nowadays. It's another way that people are getting breached and falling for fraud. They're entering things that, for a fake website, and it's just another way that credentials can be kind of given, and a bad guy can break into and get stuff. Another big one, social networks. Even though I'm a security guy, and I know a lot of you guys are security people, we all have LinkedIn, we all have Facebook, we all share stuff on there, and it's just a good way that people are breaking into or getting information, to commit fraud. I had just an example. I had a buddy from the Marines when I was a regular infantry guy. He lives in Oklahoma. His account on Facebook got hacked. Posted all these pictures of things that I could see him doing, like a four-wheeler and all this random stuff. He's like, the post said something like, "Oh, I got a great job and I have to move quick. I need to sell all this stuff so I can out. And on that little Facebook post, I'm seeing all these people like, oh, how much is this? I'm interested in that. Like, is this still available? And then as I was seeing this, and I kind of realized, like, and at first I fell for it. But as I looked into it a little bit more, I was like, wait a minute, this is fake. This is like a picture you can pull up off the internet. And then, I commented like, hey, this is fake. Don't fall for this. Sure enough, he had no idea it was going on. And this is just something that happens. People fall for it all the time.
Another example of that in the last year, I don't know if anybody here knows Mad TV, Bobby Lee, but somebody compromised his Twitter account and ended up selling about 200 MacBooks. So he was on Twitter and, he's been in movies and stuff, but effectively, he's selling MacBooks and everything on his Twitter account, and people are still falling for that. But if you actually take a step back and think about it, it's like, why is this guy selling MacBooks on Twitter?
Exactly. And again, fraud is just so, it's everywhere. And to be able to respond to that, and we'll show and share some of the data sources that you need to help detect fraud. But it's good to have a nice data analytics engine. Having data at the center of everything, it's super helpful because of the fact that you can have, a team doing something for security with some set of data and then another team doing IT stuff with that same data. It's just super helpful. Having a strong fraud analytics engine is just helpful in general for security across the board.
And it ultimately comes down to, do you know what's normal in your environment, which supports basically ingesting as many application server logs, whatever, basically as much data as possible to support what is normal so that I can see when fraud events are essentially occurring.
Absolutely. So these are some of the data sources that we've found are super helpful at helping detect fraud. There's another thing that I would take a screenshot of. And again, everyone can be affected by fraud in some form or fashion. There's definitely, at the end of the day, I'm sure everybody knows, people are kind of the weakest link. People fall for things, even, someone that's been in security for a long time. I fall for stuff all the time. Everyone's a person. Splunk does, well, actually, let me backtrack. Before I start talking about Splunk, this is back to that TDIR thing. At the end of the day, what companies are saying is, TDIR, it's just a combination of SIM and SOAR, mixed in with some threat intelligence, some third-party threat intelligence. It's really helpful for that TDIR framework that Gartner is saying is the future.
And it's important to note kind of that comment at the bottom saying that SOAR will not make you better at running SIM. You really need a mature SIM to feed your SOAR to really operationalize it. Buying a product, buying another tool isn't going to solve any problems, but if you have some sort of maturity in your SIM and your detections and kind of feeding your SOAR the right information, not, hey, let's run every piece of suspicious file or executable or something like that through our SOAR, and now we're suddenly doing things better. That's not really the case. You need to have maturity on the left side before you can have maturity on the right.
And we do Splunk specifically. We try to make it as easy as possible to have that, single platform that you're able to use SIM and SOAR and have that threat intelligence fed into it in one spot. We call it mission control. We do think that kind of is the future. That's what Gartner also believes. And we do have products that are available to make it as easy as possible for customers to do that.
So ultimately, we're trying to reduce fatigue and costs. So automation and orchestration, try to automate the repetitive tasks. You don't need your seasoned SOC analysts running malware, basically forensics, malware analysis. You can do that with the tools that you have, but a person does not necessarily need to be the one facilitating that, and you're going to free up resources effectively with the SOC analysts if you can just have them read basically an export from the tool instead of having to manually go upload a file and do all that fun stuff. And then it's, the SIM is effectively a nerve center, so connecting all your disparate tools. The SIM is the core of that. It can utilize and leverage a lot of the tools that are out there, and Splunk is pretty excellent at its approach there with Splunk Base kind of supporting all these various tie-ins. And then playbooks as well. You want to create a bunch of playbooks for how to kind of approach your security posture and your responding to incidents ultimately. And it guides faster remediation.
Yeah, and the outcome, you get great outcomes if you're doing these things, having data at the center of kind of everything, having automation and orchestration with playbooks that are help designed for, a nice, good response plan that can work through things. It's just there's really good outcomes, make life a lot easier for people that are in the trenches. And again, TDIR is a Gartner thing. It has a few components that they see as very important for that. And this is just an infographic that shows what Splunk does to help with TDIR. It's a really strong, fit. Our tools are very mature. Everybody knows we've had, a really strong platform for a long time. We, are still working on acquisitions like with, Splunk Phantom a couple years ago. We bought TrueStar, which is a threat intelligence platform that we bought, 2.5 years ago. We've got a big portfolio of tools that can really strongly help with TDIR.
And those are really augmented per kind of the last slide as well with that 2,800 plus integrations that Splunk-based supports. So strong platform with the ability to tie into the majority of the tools out there in the security and IT space.
Yep, sorry about that. Yeah, so we have a huge platform that can help people. We do have some key recommendations that just kind of help with building digital resilience or having security with digital resilience for your organizations. But some of the big things that we recommend: seek talent, teach skills. Again, I highly lean towards recruiting veterans. They're low-hanging fruit, I believe. They all understand the basic principles of security. I say all the time to veterans, if you want to help keep people safe, keep companies safe, it's time to put down that rifle, pick up a keyboard. The future is now. Cybersecurity is the future, and the future is now, actually. So it's just something that, is a perfect fit. And again, typically someone that's fresh out of the military, they're happy taking a low-paying job if they could learn the skill, and they're loyal. Like, they'll stick around for a while. There's been plenty of studies talking about how veterans, are just workhorses. Obviously not everybody, but
Yeah, and on that first bullet point, raw talent versus trained skills is a big one. I would vastly prefer any employee who is eager to learn but doesn't necessarily know the subject matter. They're teachable, and they want to be there. They want to increase their skills and their talent across the board versus kind of trying to find somebody who exactly fits, the job description itself, right? So there's more growth and more kind of career expansion that you can have with the taught skills versus just hiring somebody who fits the mold.
Another recommendation, know your cloud. Not all clouds are the same. Not saying any of them are better than others, but even within Splunk, we're able to work with everybody, but we work a little better with some clouds than we do with others. Just because of the fact that the way they're designed, it's just easier to architect. Don't make the mistake of thinking, oh, Splunk has this tool and it's going to be available to us in the cloud that we use. That might not always be the case. A lot of the stuff is roadmapped, but there's some clouds where, you will get all the bells and whistles. You can always use Splunk Cloud or another tool, but just know your cloud, know the capabilities that it has. Make sure you're aware of that before you make a buying decision.
And learning your cloud is a big part of that too, because access and identity, the IAM side of things for cloud is vastly different than what we've experienced with on-prem IT. So kind of understanding the hierarchy of things and basically, the hierarchy of access, as we saw with Microsoft's account recently, is very, very fundamental to kind of understanding not just, hey, I'm going to provision this guy access, but understanding kind of the impact of that downstream effectively.
Another key recommendations: use partnerships that you guys have. Splunk, we're a good tool. we're I always tell people we are mascot's a pony, but we're not a one-trick pony. We do a lot of things really, really well. But you know, when it comes to security, security's complicated. It's a lot. It's complex. There's a lot of things. Use resources like Trace3 or another company, and other services that are out there to help, you know, be a consultant. Don't just go out and buy a bunch of services or buy things kind of blindly. I don't want you guys to waste money. You know, get as much bang for buck out of what you have.
And that goes back to the don't just buy tools to buy tools to check a box. You really need to have a clear understanding of kind of the goals of implementation and kind of what you're building towards and what's important to the business. When you come in and implement Splunk, throwing all your data out, it's one thing, but building detections another, and doing it the right way is vastly important when you're implementing those.
Yeah, and then automation. You know, there's just too much going on. People that are in the trenches, SOC analysts, they've got a lot going on that they can't be looking and investigating everything, you know, the way that investigations typically are done. There's a lot of stuff that's repetitive, that's kind of mundane, that's pretty easy to do, that you can have an automated tool take care of that stuff for you. So definitely use automation, make life easier for your analyst. I've seen a lot of examples of, you know, talking to customers that they're happy, they're content at the company they work for, you know, but they want to go work at another company that has a lot easier resources or more resources that they can use, so their life is easier. Make life easier for the people that are, you know, taking care of your company.
Yeah, get rid of the mundane tasks, let them do something that's actually interesting to them. You'll find that you retain talent quite a bit better with that approach and end up with kind of a more healthy environment ultimately.
And again, you know, consolidate that spalling tool set. Believe me, being a Splunk employee, I'm all for people just buying a bunch of tools, feeding that data into Splunk, but sometimes that's not the best answer. You want to, you know, get as much value as you can out of each tool. You know, we all know economic times are a little tough right now. You know, get that value out of the tools that you have, out of your SIM, out of, you know, a data platform. You know, use as much of that tool as you can, consolidate everything so you're able to have visibility across the board. It's just a best practice.
And that goes back to the automation side of things too, is you don't want siloed tools. You want your SIM to be kind of the center of everything, the nerve center of your SOC, but you also need it to integrate with the tools that you have and really leverage them to the full extent. And automation is a big part of that, but kind of silos of tools is another side of that argument as well, where you don't want that in your environment. You want it all cohesive and easy to manage and easy to automate effectively.
Well, cool. That's pretty much all we had for now. Do we have any questions? Easy peasy. Love it. Appreciate you guys taking the time to sit down and listen. We'll give you guys some time back. Thank you for taking part in Houston SecCon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, cheers.